I stepped into the public education classroom in 1990, so I remember all of these kinds of trends. Our first keynote speaker will be up next, Dr. Mike Schmoker. Dr. Mike Schmoker is a former administrator, English teacher, football coach. He has written several best-selling books and numerous articles for education journals, newspapers, and for Time magazine. His most recent ASCD bestseller are the expanded second edition of Focus and Results Now 2.0, which you have on your table, which was a #1 bestseller on Amazon. The first edition was a finalist for the Book of the Year by the Association of Educational Publishers. Mike is a recipient of the Distinguished Service Award by the National Association of Secondary School Principals for his publications and his presentations. In an Education Week survey of national school leaders, he was ranked near the top of the best resources of practical, nuts and bolts advice and wisdom and insight on effective school improvement. Mike has consulted and keynoted throughout the U.S., Canada, Australia, China, and Jordan. And he now lives in Tempe, Arizona with his wife, Cheryl. We thank you for coming and speaking with us, Mike, and we look forward to what you have to say. Welcome.
Thanks. Howdy. Hey, stand up for just half a second. We'll take a little break before my presentation's done. Stand up just real quick. Turn to the person next to you. 30 seconds. Tell them something you got from Senator Hill's presentation that meant a lot to you. Go. Okay, you can wrap that up. We'll have a seat. Thanks. All right. Well, when I do presentations and at various points, I'll do what a teacher does, and I'm normally talking to educators. This is my first time talking to a group like yours, by the way, that's largely board members. But I'll go 3, 2, and 1, and that means we're going to resume. So anyway, here we go. When you travel, you learn certain things. Sometimes you even, you learn some pretty profound truths. My wife and I were in Scotland not too long ago, and here's a profound truth that we acquired while traveling. We all want a powerful mind, don't we? Yes? Of course. Well, there you go. So bottoms up, folks. I'm just about to finish. This is a quad espresso. It's 4 shots of espresso and nothing else. First time I had one of these, these guys kept saying, "Oh, you like coffee? Oh, you don't even know coffee till you've had pure espresso." And some of you, how many of you just drink shots of espresso? Any of you? Well, it's not that common. It's a little bit European. Sorry, but it is. So I'm in this shop, and he says, just order a double espresso, take a little sip, and then just knock it back. And I did it, and I saw God. And I've been doing it ever since. So I actually, the power of a person's mind, this definitely gives a little power to my meager mind when I do presentations. It really does. In fact, I've come to find out just in the last few weeks, I found out a lot of speakers do the same thing I do. They'll have 3 or 4 shots of espresso before they speak. So anyway, let's get into some things that echo a lot of what Senator Hill just talked about. The current system, again, echoing a lot of what Senator Hill shared with us. Even Education Week. Now that's interesting. Education Week is about as establishment as you're ever going to get in education. It's sort of the newspaper of record, they call themselves, all right? Even they will admit, and they don't like to, but they say maybe 30% of our kids are getting a decent education, maybe 30%. And if you look at how well kids write or how well they're prepared, say in writing or reading or real literacy, I think 30% might be an exaggeration, okay? This is Education Week. 7 to 10% of kids who live in poverty or who receive free and reduced lunch, if you know what that means. These are the poor kids in our schools. That's the percentage of the kids who'll ever get a college degree. It could be 4, 5, 10 times as high as that if we did the right things. I'll come to the right things in half a moment. When you got to college, those of you who went, you might not remember this, but there was a change, something different. When you're sitting in that first class or two, when you're at the university, and they've discovered that this is the number one thing that hits a college kid in the face and causes them either to struggle like crazy or drop out. Would you guess what it is? What's the number one obstacle that prevents a kid from feeling confident and doing well in college and maybe even dropping out? And you might not guess it, but when I tell you, you'll go, yeah, I think so. What do you suppose? The reading load. That's the word they use. K-12 almost deprives students of the opportunity to read and to read enough to do well in college classes. It may be 20 to 40%, but that's old stuff. You know, we have a kind of 15-year-old reading crisis and reading stamina crisis today. 20 to 40% of our kids hit college and are ready for the reading load, so they struggle or drop out. The solution, in overarching terms, folks, how many of you know Peter Drucker? You know that name? Good old Peter Drucker. This is his most famous quote. Most famous quote, and with good reasons. When you do the right things, it guarantees that performance will improve. It guarantees. So the question is, what are the right things in education? What are they? How many of you recognize that as a song title? Any of you? The rest of you, there was like an obscure British rock band. They were called the Beatles. So they do have a song called A Day in the Life. Now I say A Day in the Life because what I'm going to share with you is a very kind of brutal, unpleasant slide about K-12 education. Strangely enough, folks, my educational audiences, educator audiences, almost all of them resonate with what I'm about to share with you, as negative as it may come off. When a kid, how a kid spends an average day in school matters hugely to their own sense of well-being, their sense of confidence, their job prospects, all these hugely vital things. And yet, this is typical stuff, and all my educational audiences of educators, I should say, agree with me on this. English language arts, I ask the audience as I'll ask you, what are the two things you're least apt to catch a kid engaged in during an English language arts class? Two things, and it's so obvious it's crushing. Reading and writing. That is the single most significant fact in all of K-12 education. The moment that happens, that flips, people like me are out of business, and thank God. The moment that becomes one of the most common rather than the most rare things that happens in school, that a kid is reading and writing. You walk into class, there's kids reading and writing like crazy. You're going to see a complete transformation of what goes on in schools. We're going to come back to that. Just quickly, how many of you think social studies, history, etc., ought to be just about as reading and writing intensive as English? Would you not more or less agree? Okay. I can remember sitting with a group of about 7 central office administrators who said, oh no, don't you worry, we have plenty of that going on in our schools. So I said, well, just for fun, let's all fan out, and we'll hit a handful of classes each, come back in a week. How many classes did we see reading and writing going on? Came back together, can you guess? 40-some classes we had. Two. We saw things like kids sitting in groups. I'm going to come back at this a couple of times. Group work. Gotta look at that. Walk in, kids had 2 days to create a political cartoon. No transfer of knowledge going on there. You remember Senator Hill's important mention of the need to impart knowledge and to transfer knowledge one generation to the next. No, the kids you're the artist, so Tom's the artist, so he's gonna make the political cartoon. You were the idea person, the other 3 people just sat there and shot the bull for 2 days. Stuff like this, forgive me, this goes on all over the place. My audiences of educators don't even contend with me when I share these kinds of things. They say, yeah, that's kind of what happens. Science, walk in, kids sitting at tables in groups. Help me with this one. There's a stack of 3x5 cards on each table. And you've got big animals and medium-sized and small ones right down to tiny little insects. And the kids are supposed to put those cards in the order of the food chain. How long do you think they were given to do that? Maybe 8 cards, big to small. Just turn to each other for 5 seconds. How long do you think they were given to, how long do you think, forgive me, how long do you think it should take a group of high school kids to put those cards in the order of the food chain? Turn to just 5 seconds. Take a guess with your friends. All right, and 3, 2, 1. Second question. Turn to each other, and again, you're a somewhat different audience, but I'll bet you got a good hunch. How long do you think they were given? Turn to each other, another 5, 7 seconds. And when I ask my audiences after, I say, was there a huge, huge gap between your first guess and your second guess? They all nod, groan, laugh, and say, yeah. 20-some minutes, that's how much time. As the teacher went around and had a little food chain wrap with you guys, and then over with you guys. What's the rest of the class doing while all this is going on? Time, you could make the argument that time is the most, you could make this argument. Time's the most precious resource in the school day, okay? So, funny things going on. I'm not going to get into the weeds as much with you all because I want to give you a little break, and I also want to have some Q&A. I walk into a class, and this might sound odd to your ear, but you've got a math teacher who seems to have a lot of energy, and he's articulate, suburban Maryland, and he's talking away, and there's an equation on the board, and they're solving for X or something, and as he's asking questions, kids are doing something with one of their limbs. What are they doing? They're raising their hands. But the teacher this is going to sound strange to some of you, what does the teacher do? Makes one of the gravest mistakes. I'm hyping this a little bit, okay? The gravest mistake you can make when kids raise their hands, he actually does what? Calls on them. I'm hyping this a little bit. How many of you have even an inkling? You might not. That universal way of teaching is about as destructive as anything that ever entered the classroom. I'm not saying you never call on kids to raise their hands, but the routine, almost uninterrupted, custom of I ask a question, who raises their hand? You ever thought about this? What percentage of kids raise their hand because they have the answer? You think it's a high percentage? No. It's way less than a third. Kids who routinely raise their hands in response to a question. So basically, we're teaching that top third. So I call the person who raises their hand, I get the right answer, and then what do? And those are the same words educators will say. We move on. And they all know this, and they've heard it somewhere. And what you need to do is reduce drastically the amount of that routine and replace it with cold calling. Like you ask the question, you give the kids a chance to work on it, maybe with a partner, and then you say, Tom, what did you and Kirsten come up with? And you get an answer. And if you don't get it right, you don't say, oh, how stupid you are. You don't do that. You say, that's not a bad guess. You prepare them. I don't want to digress too much. You prepare them in such a way that they have at least an even shot at the answer. But every teacher in America, and I mean every, knows this. And yet it never gets emphasized. It's not part of evaluations, and yet it's responsible for, you tell me, the great majority of kids coming to school knowing they'll get at least a C in their courses, and they can be completely tuned out all period. Are you with me? Does that make sense? These are basic things that educators know, but we don't do them. And just because I want to alienate a few more of you here, worksheets. Educators agree with me that they're some of the worst products, the worst resources we can use when we want to teach kids. Turn to each other for a moment. What percentage of the day, the school day, do you think is spent filling out worksheets? What percent, let me change that. The percentage of an entire 12, 13-year career, what percentage of the time kids spend in school is spent filling out these almost always low-level or worthless worksheets? Take 10 seconds, compare notes, please. Okay, real quick, gang. 3 and 2 and 1. When I throw the question at educators, I walk the aisles. I walk and I say, just shout them out. All of them weigh in at 60, 70, 80% of the time. It's easily over 50%. That's very conservative. So that's over 6 years of the time a kid spends in school is spent filling out one of the worst forms of, and teachers agree on this. Educators almost universally agree that that's a terrible way to spend time. Are you starting to see a pattern here? There are massive, I want to use the word obvious opportunities for us to make school radically better almost overnight if we did certain things, the right things, and stopped doing certain other things. None of them are all that prohibitive either. So just again, in an overarching way, here's Michael Fullen, who's one of the great education researchers. He says there's just too much overload and baggage in the educational system today. The skinny, the essence, is about what? These criteria. The smallest number, because we can't get better at 10 things at once. It makes sense? The smallest number of what? Highest leverage, not high, not good, not even pretty good, but the best, the highest leverage, easy to understand. Man, is that important. We throw stuff at educators all the time that can't possibly be understood well enough to be implemented tomorrow morning. The stuff I'm going to talk to you about and the remainder are all, and I've already talked to you about, are things we can begin to do just about immediately. And educators agree with me. What happens? Stunningly powerful consequences. You'll all get these slides if you haven't got, by the way, just FYI. Michael Fullen basically says you don't just get, incremental increases. The moment teachers, all the schools I'm going to mention and the ones I write about are schools that made dramatic gains within a school year. Those gains, or the improvement, actually shows up when? Within days and weeks, not years, of teachers mastering and even doing some of these things we'll talk about in the next few minutes. So what are the right things? The right things with the highest leverage. You decide. Take a stab at this. This is what I throw at educators. Look up there. You're familiar with some of these terms. They're not all that arcane. Response to intervention is RTI's response to intervention. It's basically, it's heavy-duty tutoring for any kid who doesn't learn. Take a look at that. I'll give you 30 seconds to turn to your partners. Well, first kind of scan it. Turn to your pals. Which 3 would knock it out of the ballpark? And I don't mean, that's not an opinion. I'll prove that. Which 3 would knock it out of the ballpark? The rest have either a weak or negative impact, even though they're hugely popular. 3 that would knock it out of the ballpark. Which 3? Folks, I don't mean to nudge you, but if you're sitting alone, you might consider moving next to somebody so you can compare notes on some of these pairings. Okay, are you ready? Here's the answers. Brace yourselves. These are the right things. There they are. Just kidding. None of those 3, hugely popular, they're massively popular. They have either a neutral or negative effect. What does? In fact, they've done untold destruction, some of these, because they divert us from the stuff that really matters. So here's the things which I think I've quite reasonably concluded, along with limitless other researchers. What do they have in common? Look at them. Look at those 3. They're boring. They're boring. Now you might look at checking for understanding and think, well, what the hell is that? I'll talk about it in a moment. It's so obvious. It's a bit of a trade name, but I'll get to it in a moment. We live in a strange age. These are 2 highly reputable researchers, Daniel Willingham and Andrew Rotherham. And it's interesting what they say. They wrote this article. No one has ever contended against it or said, oh, no, that can't be true. What's something all doctors have to do before they do surgery, or when they're making rounds and they might, make physical contact with people as they move around? There's something they got to be very aware of, and it has to do with they got to wash their hands. And look at the metaphor Willingham and Rotherham use here. Look at this. If that isn't a statement about where we're at, The reason there have been declines, the reason we underperform, is because education hasn't even gotten to the point where the most fundamental effective stuff is common in classrooms. When it is, we're going to see something stunningly powerful, to quote Michael Fullan, happen in schools. These are the only three things I want to talk to you about. This is the agenda for the remaining time. I hope we have a little bit, I'm going to have a little break in here in the middle, and then we'll have, I hope, a little bit of Q&A. So those three things. I'm not going to get into the weeds deeply on these, but I am going to just start out by saying, here's a George Orwell quote I like to use often as not. It's not that we don't know some of these things, educators and others. It's that we don't restate them when they start to fade or when we forget about them. There's a whole list of great quotes that say basically, we don't need new information. We need someone to remind us of what we already know. So, guaranteed and viable curriculum, I'm going to run through this quickly. This is an expression by a guy named Robert Marzano. He basically said, what do you know? This guaranteed and viable curriculum turns out to be a big, big deal. Meaning, if you're a parent, what's your name? Diana, if you're a parent, you should be able to go to Principal Karen and say, Karen, I've heard rumors that these three teachers teach the same course, same grade level, but they teach very different stuff. At this point, educators will agree there's huge differences. Same school, same hallway, same grade in what actually gets taught in math, U to U to U, English, social studies, you name it. It's all over the map. That ain't good. You should be able to say, can you guarantee me that at least the main important stuff gets taught by all three of them in these courses? And you should be able to look at her and say, I guarantee it. That's what we want. Viable, I won't get into that so much. It's a good curriculum, let's say. This is why that's important. General knowledge, and again, kind of echoing Senator Hill's comments, good ones. General knowledge is so important to education. You could almost say it's the heart of education. Folks, it's almost the basis for reading comprehension. If you know something, you pick up a text and you start to read it, if you have a certain amount of knowledge or context, your comprehension soars. So this is so well established now. We need to have an organized, coherent curriculum to make that happen. This is the case for guaranteed and viable curriculum. Teachers learn enormously from teachers if they meet every couple of weeks for half an hour or so, and I say, Diane, here on our schedule, really a curriculum is a schedule of what to teach and when. Does that make sense? A schedule of what to teach and when. So we anticipate what's coming up and we say, how can we best teach that? What can you teach me teach you? We call those professional learning communities or PLCs. Can't do them without a curriculum. Massive factor when we allow for this. Coherent curriculum would erase the kindergarten. How many of you would guess that there's a big difference in kids' ability when they hit kindergarten? Massive gaps between the low, medium, and high. It would erase that. It would erase that. Coherent curriculum, and it ensures my favorite one. When you have a clear, literacy-rich schedule of what to teach and when, all kids read and write and have meaningful discussions, all of them consistently. It's not like you do it pretty consistently and you just don't do it at all. Most of my kids' teachers did very little meaningful stuff in the area of literacy. You add it all up, it's the number one factor, because it influences all the other positive factors. Now, if that's the case, what does it look like? Can you tell just looking at this? This is the kind of curriculum I recommend. Look up there for just a moment. If you were a teacher, how many of you have been teachers? Just curious. Oh my goodness, a slew of you. Great. Wouldn't it be nice to walk into a school and see that and think, wow, I can continue to contribute to this. These are teacher-made, by the way, teacher-made. You can see the topic column. The teacher knows the major topics to teach, knows the texts to use, and knows the questions that are going to drive meaningful reading, discussion, and writing. That is real literacy. There's a middle school in Tucson, Arizona, that was in the school district where I worked. 2 teachers basically did that. They just set things up in English and in social studies. And in 1 year, they made the largest gain in the state on the exam. They went from the middle of the state to the top just by saying we're going to throw out all the stuff we've always done and replace it with, students, you're going to read this text. You're going to underline, annotate, discuss, and then we're going to write an essay every 2 weeks. You're actually going to be writing almost every day, just short paragraph type stuff. Then we're going to write full-blown essays. That was the entire curriculum. That was their new curriculum. 1 year, they go from middle of the state to the top. That's the kind of thing that can happen when you have this kind of curriculum. Here's math. Now that's calculus. Can you kind of see what's going on there? That's 9 weeks. This is I'm just showing you slices here, folks. That's 9 weeks. Each week the teachers know what to teach. They even know about how many, you see the brackets? They know about how many days to teach each one. They know which textbook materials to use. The same format would be used for first grade math as you would use in calculus. Can you see what's going on here if you're a teacher? You walk into a school where they've got this, everything changes. Everything changes. My wife taught at Tempe High, and she comes on and she's informed by my old friend, Kate Glenn, walks in and says, they're going to shut down Tempe High. 11 schools in this big Tempe Union High School district, 11 high schools. She says, they're going to shut us down and send all our kids to the other schools unless our math scores go up. Other scores, but mostly math. We're so bad. So almost by accident, they said, well, how about if somebody said, how about if we create a curriculum, a schedule of what to teach and when? They literally created a curriculum in a few hours. They roughed it out, and then at their subsequent meetings kind of refined it a bit. What happened? The first year they made the biggest gains they'd ever made in the history of that school. The second year they went up again. I went to an awards ceremony at the district office at the end of that year, and they were in a 3-way tie for the largest gains in the state in mathematics. Just doing that. Now I can talk at some point about the fact that when you have curriculum in place, it influences quality of instruction. It even increases the amount of literacy activities that go on, reading, writing, meaningful discussion. But just that one thing, that's how transformative it can be. I'll tell you a couple of more stories here, but I just want to know, why have I forgotten? Kane, is it? Yeah. Kane, where's the red? I want to be able to. Green. Oh, it's that one. There we go. Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you. Duh. Okay. And here's just a garden variety. I didn't make these. These are all made by other teachers using my format. People can adjust these and do them a little differently than I suggest, but these people did what I suggested. All had gains. Can you see, it's a little bit of a distance, but can you see these kids in one grading period? I want you to know this is 3rd grade. One grading period, they're going to read 2 books, a generous handful of articles and short stories, a handful of poems. They're going to do, look at these writing assessments, and these are the kinds of questions they're going to explore. 1.5 to 2 pages, 1.5 to 2. I've taken 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade students through exercises where any one of them can write 1.5 to 2 page papers. There's a way to set it up. I wish I had more time to talk about it. This is the kind of thing that View Park Middle and High School, they get a new teacher. It's an old guy. And he has this argumentative paper kind of format. It's similar to things we already know about, where you read, you underline, annotate the text you're reading, whether it's a chapter in a book or a short story or an article, and you take that and you organize it into some main points, and then you write a paper arguing for or against whatever it might be. In a year or two, this school becomes it's like 95% African American. It becomes overnight in the state of California, the highest majority minority school in the state. But there is one caveat. Within a few months, everyone saw how successful this old guy was, and it was a charter school, I think. So he didn't even have a teacher's certification. There are real benefits to not having a teacher certification. And you think I'm kidding. Everybody else started doing the same thing as him in all their classes, and this is the kind of thing that can happen. Again, I repeat, the highest achieving majority minority school in this state went from 0 to 60 in about a year. This is the kind of stuff that can happen. Now, I ask educators this after showing them these slides. I say, well, how about your school? Can you guarantee that there's a crystal clear, sequential, easy to use, literacy rich, meaning there's lots of opportunity for reading, writing, discussion, curriculum? And you could probably imagine, folks, just turn to each other for a moment, okay? What's your guess about what an average educator would say, if they're being honest, in answer to this question? Take about 30 seconds to share with each other. What do you think would be an honest reply to this question? Okay, thank you much. And 3, and 2, and 1. Now, part of the reason I'm doing this 3, 2, 1 with you, let me get your attention, is that educators themselves respond very well to it. And then I say to them, if you just say, okay, everyone, let's get back together. Okay, hang on, that's enough. Let's regroup. That's not very effective. In a classroom, any teacher who uses some kind of signal, even a little noisemaker, whatever it might be, and goes, okay, 3, 2, and 1, they are going to get through so much more material and in a good way throughout a lesson when they use such little methods. They're powerful methods. Every teacher knows about them. They're seldom mentioned and almost never reinforced, and they're not even part in any way of teacher evaluation. Unless you can tell me about a teacher evaluation that has that built in, I doubt it. These are the kinds of ordinary, seemingly boring, pedestrian methods that make a world of difference in the classroom. We don't repeat them or emphasize them enough or talk up their benefits. This is what we need to be doing. So, whoops. I have a feeling you can probably guess how educators respond to this question. They basically say no. I say, in fact, what I say is, raise your hand if you believe we still have a good ways to go on this. The hands fly up. 99% of the hands fly up. Every teacher knows we don't have curriculum, really, truly have curriculum planted in our schools. So just to know that you're in good company. Look at some of these findings by major researchers who've looked at this. Do you know what percentage of teachers get their lesson plans from truly lousy sources like Teachers Pay Teachers and Pinterest? It's like 90-some%. And don't blame do not blame the teachers here. When you deprive a teacher of a curriculum, you really do a number on them professionally. You put them in a terrible spot. You really do. Wild variation. David Berliner just died a couple of weeks ago. He said he'd walk into schools and find that Kirsten teaches this is elementary school, teaches 27, that's the number, 27 times as much science as Tom. And when you ask her, you say, Kirsten, what's the big difference with you and Tom? She goes, oh, I love science. Tom goes, I'm in science. And when they ask the principal has no idea that there's a difference between these two. We'll get to that in half a second. Bob Marzano and I wrote an article. We said basically we're living in the era of curricular chaos, going all the way back to John Goodland. 70 years we haven't had curriculum. It's the #1 factor. But the good news, folks, Mather Elementary School, my buddy Kim Marshall was a principal for 9 years at a large, it's the oldest school in the Boston public system. And I know this guy, he's my pal. He works tirelessly. He tried every cool thing, every fad that came down the pike. No results, no gains. The 10th year he thought, I'm going to look at the Massachusetts state standards and their assessment, and we're going to create a schedule of what to teach and when. Every course. Did it in a few hours. roughed it out, refined it at subsequent meetings. What happened? In 1 year, they went from the bottom, this is a high poverty school, the bottom third to the top third, the largest gain in the entire system. How long did it take? 1 school year, 1 school year. That's how powerful these are as levers, truly high leverage. Here's the thing, there's a caveat. How many of you know W. Edwards Deming? The guy, the mind behind total quality management way back in the day. Oh, for what it's worth. He basically said, you can't manage what you can't monitor. Susan Sakowitz was the principal at Brockton High School, in Brockton, Massachusetts. I spent time with her back there and toured their school. And she said, you got to monitor like crazy. And I wanted to say, well, all you really need to do, I'm not kidding, all your administrators need to do is be trained in certain pretty obvious methods for walking through a school, I'm not exaggerating, for maybe an hour a week. Did you hear me? 1 hour a week. With a clipboard or a yellow pad, and just jot down maybe a rough percentage of how many classrooms they see, for instance, where the curriculum appears to being taught. You don't have to be an expert. You can tell if you walk into the class and they're spending 2 days on a political cartoon, that probably ain't in the curriculum. Would you agree with me? Okay. So she says you got to monitor like crazy. I would just say you got to monitor, or nothing good is going to happen. So here she is at this school. Their achievement level is so low, it's like second to the bottom. The Boston Globe said it's an academic cesspool. That's a quote from the Boston Globe. Susan Sakowitz gets together with 4 or 5 other teachers. She's a teacher herself at the time. Gets together with them and says, got to do something. All they did was the 3 things we talked about here, starting with curriculum. That's all they did. In 1 year, the Commissioner of Education, David, what's his last name, calls him up to say, Susan, you ought to be proud. Your school made the largest gain in the state. 1 year. The next year, the next year, the next year. 5 years later, they go from almost rock bottom to the top 10% highest achieving schools in the state. Just by doing these 3 things, starting with curriculum and, if I may say, making damn sure they monitored to see that that curriculum was being implemented, okay? Now, I'm going to pause here because this is pretty heavy stuff coming up in a moment. Let's take an 8-minute break and get back here in exactly 8 minutes. That's when we'll resume, okay? You need a break after sitting this long, don't you think? See you in a bit. All right. Now this, what I'm about to share with you, hope you had a decent little break. It was a short one, I know, but it wasn't scheduled, so you know, give me some credit for that. Ooh, indeed. It's one of my favorite expressions. Invisible crisis. There's a guy named Richard Elmore, who, again, the late, great Richard Elmore. He was regarded as people talked about him literally as an icon at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, which is interesting because schools of ed aren't always that self-reflective or self-aware about their shortcomings. He really went after his own profession, and especially what got taught or not taught to educators, teachers, administrators, leaders, you name it. And look at what he said. And no one, again, I read an awful lot of education literature. No one's ever contended against what he says here. Look at this. Read this and weep. I had coffee with him one day, and he said, the reason there's, well, let me share the other slide with you. That's the first part of it. You don't want to go after principals and leaders aggressively because they are not trained in this. It is not emphasized. In all the years I worked in public school, it was very rare that a teacher became a principal or an administrator because they were a superb teacher / knew how to manage instruction. Incredibly, astonishingly rare was that the case. There were other reasons, okay? Subsequently, just to get to the second half of this quote, and there it is. That has to change. That has to change. This might be something boards bring to the attention of the administration and the entire school district. This has got to change. This is an invisible crisis. Few people know that there's neither, he literally says there is no instructional management in schools, pretty much, close to zero. I'm not saying there's none, but it's pretty bad. Now the next piece I want to talk to you about is literacy. And read this. I've suggested to educators that they put both of these quotes on their mirrors and read them every morning, just to remind them of how important this is. Give that a hard read, folks. Now that's the positive. What happens in a school system where nowhere near enough students acquire literacy? And this is what we don't quite get. This is a big deal, big deal. And then the question is, well, what is authentic literacy? Well, we're going to come to that. We're going to come to that in half a second, but I'll show you what inauthentic literacy is. This is what my kids spent far more time doing, my own two daughters, than anything resembling literacy. Centers. Centers are where the teacher sits with one group of 4 or 5 students, and all the other students are left to work on what they call centers, which teachers, bless their hearts, they labor over these, and they put materials and stuff together, and the kids basically sit there and learn very, very little, if not nothing. Skits, movies, collages, mobiles, these are things from the time I was in doing my student teaching. This is the kind of stuff that still prevails. Worksheets. What's authentic literacy? Well, here's one of my favorite instructional experts, a guy who wrote a book called Teach Like a Champion. Anyone heard of that book? Sold like 2 million copies. Doug Lemov. Look what he says there. Ain't that beautiful? So, how much reading should a kid do in an average school day? Turn to each other for just 5 seconds. Turn to your pals. Take a wild guess. What do you think? You got a 5 or 6 hour school day spread across the whole day. How much time? Thank you, because this could make for some very interesting conversations, I know. 3, 2, 1. Here's what all the experts, I mean the real experts, say. 60 minutes. You think, oh, well, that's impossible. No, it's not. It's not at all impossible. You have 5 or 6 hours to play around with. English, social studies, and science could easily do that hour a day if they replaced an awful lot of what they do now, okay? And I'm going to talk about how to go about that reading and to make sure that it actually happens. What's going through your mind right now might be, well, how do we get Bill, who's a non-reader, to just say, read an hour a day, Bill? Well, lots of luck with that. Not going to happen. We'll get to that. Writing, 40 to 60 minutes. That doesn't mean every day you're assigning reading, collecting papers, slaving over a stack of papers and recording them in your grade book. You don't have to grade a fraction of the writing that kids do. You grade it, or assess it, if you will, just by walking around and making sure that they wrote something suitable or intelligible enough in response to content-based, going back to Senator Hill's solid emphases, content-based, knowledge-rich lessons where they're answering questions about what they're learning, okay? Again, could very easily be done if we replaced a ton of the things we now do, like worksheets, like collages, like group work. Up to 70%, some people say up to 70% of the day is spent in group work, which has limited to 0 value in many cases. I'm not saying you eliminate group work. Can I make that clear? You don't eliminate it, but you reduce it pretty drastically. Discussion for every text, and there you go. Now, I show you this to kind of get at something important. I talk about group work. I talk about centers. There's this new notion. Do any of you read Education Week by any chance? Does it? Yeah. Well, if you happen to, and I'm sorry if I'm bragging. Tim Shanahan, one of my favorite literacy experts, he and I just wrote an article for Education Week, and until a couple of days ago, for 2 full weeks, it was the #1 most read article in Education Week, the last 2 weeks. It's still in their top 5. All we said was, stop doing so much of this, because when you're working with that group of kids, what are the other kids doing? There's an anti-whole class instruction bias. And it's done enormous destruction. I wish I could talk about it more. If you are bored or can find your way onto Education Week and maybe get past their paywall, who knows. Some of their articles pop up for free. It's called Small Group Instruction is Not as Effective as You Think. Small group reading instruction is not as effective as you think. Okay. So I just show you that here's a teacher you can guess cares about the students, doing their best. They've been told in their ed courses, they've been told by State Department of Education people, their evaluators, put kids in groups, none of this whole class stuff, which is absolute madness with zero foundation in research. Education still largely does not wash its hands. It ignores research. So here, and again, I don't want to get into the weeds. I'm going to do these very quickly because I vacillated about sharing some of these detailed things with you. Teachers need to teach whole class, and they need to do literacy instruction in any and every course, something like this. See if this doesn't make sense to you. Remember the George Orwell quote that it's the obvious stuff we overlook? Tell me if this doesn't resonate with most of you. We should be, in my opinion, reading out loud to students as they read along some portion of every daily reading assignment. We read it with feeling. There's great research on this. You want kids, when I was teaching, say, To Kill a Mockingbird, my kids loved it if I read the first page and a half. Then they'd be told to read the whole rest of the book. Just kidding. No. What would I do at that point? Doesn't common sense indicate I'd say, well, now you guys read a certain amount, okay? So, and by the way, to find out if the kids are reading along, all you got to do is just shout out, is it Jan or Jan? It's Jan. It is Jan. Jan, and Jan just reads one word, and that tells me he's on the same word as me. If Jan tends to be inattentive, Jan knows I'm going to cold call on him a little more often than I call on Hudson here, who is such a good kid. Look at him. Look at him. Okay? Simple thing. If you want all the kids, you want to guarantee the kids are reading with you. I've done this limitless times. It works. Okay? Enough. So you tell the kids to read Tim Shanahan, my buddy who wrote this article with me. Have them start out having them read 200, this is early grades, a couple hundred words, maybe 300, then build up to 350, and then 400. They're building up their reading stamina. As soon as they read their segment, what do you think we'd probably want them to do? Doesn't common sense tell you, as they underline, annotate, have them briefly pair share what they underlined or annotated. Just a quick chat. Maybe call on a couple of them. Have them scribble something, and then when they're finished, they discuss what they've been reading. It's followed by informal writing and writing instruction. Folks, that ought to be occurring, that protocol, that whole class protocol ought to be occurring across the curriculum. I'm not saying music and art should include as much of it as certain other courses. I'm not. But even in music, don't you think kids ought to be reading about musicians or musical epics and maybe reading a biography of a composer or something and maybe writing something about it, talking about it in class? I think so. Now let's get to this very interesting third part. I have a lot of fun with this because, again, educators know where I'm going when they see these. Turn to your friends. What word do you think might go in that blank? Turn to each other. Take a wild guess. Okay. What word, same word, by the way, same word goes here. What word do you think that is? Teaching. One more. And this is just before the pandemic. Michael Sonbert, who is, again, thousands of classrooms. This guy, he's quite a guy. Man, he is out there in schools all over the country. Same word, and the word is, it's teaching. What the hell? You know what I'm saying? What's going on here? Could anything be worse or more explanatory than the fact that Our kids aren't learning as much as they should because teachers just don't teach them. Rick Hess, one of my favorite sort of conservative writers, brilliant man, just says, well, teachers need to be told to get back to teaching. When you take whole class, so-called whole class teaching, we used to call it teaching. We have to say whole class now because so much goes on with kids left to themselves to kind of teach themselves or work through a worksheet. You know what I'm talking about. The word is teaching. What do you think explains the absence of teaching? Maybe before I blab on. Turn to each other again. What obstacles, what substitutes for whole class teaching have invaded the school room? Turn to each other, please. Take 15 seconds. What gets in the way of teaching? Technology, well, managing behavior. Bureaucracy. Yes.
The lack of teaching the teachers how to teach when they're in college. Because we hire them thinking they know how to do this, but they're not being taught this.
In fact, in a moment, I'm going to sort of talk about what every teacher, I was about to say they're never taught, they're never trained, and it's mentioned, but the actual rudiments of good teaching really are not ever truly taught. They're mentioned, but they're not taught. And we're going to get to that in just a second. Well, how many of you resonate with those reasons there? Yeah. It's all about centers, group work, setting things up with little manipulatives and this and that. Kids with, I don't know if you're going to, I have a feeling this resonates with at least some of you. You've got a tape recorder and headphones, and the kids are supposed to be listening while they read a book. I mean, it takes them forever to put the headphones on and start the thing or stop it or ignore it, or because there's no teacher there. There's no teacher there. Can some teachers pull this off? Maybe, but it doesn't even hold a candle to just a good, structured, effectively structured, good lesson for the whole class. I'm sure there'll be some questions about ed tech and other things. I enjoy talking about those in the Q&A. What's the heart of effective whole class instruction? Let me tell you some interesting stories here. Amanda Ripley, I read a book by her called The Smartest Kids in the World. Goes around the country, writes for the Atlantic Monthly, goes around the country and wants to see, well, what about the highest achieving schools or most improved school systems in the world? What are they doing? And she discovers that, this is interesting, 3/4 of the way through the book she goes, I made the one single momentous discovery was something any teacher could do tomorrow morning, but almost none of them do it in American schools, where it's the key to improvement in these other systems. And I ask my educator audiences, what is it? It's 3 words, and every one of you knows those 3. They don't get emphasized. There's no training in the use of this 3-word method. What are those 3 words? There we go. Doug Lemov writes the first edition of one of his books on instruction. Fabulous. But he doesn't quite explicate this thing that he later discovers is the key to a good lesson, exactly the same 3 words. You probably don't know them. Some of you do, I know. Charles Payne, an urban educator, goes into schools in some of the most troubled urban school districts and discovers, my gosh, Bill here outperforms everybody in his school and most of the district. Nobody even knows about this guy or what he does, and it's the same 3 words. I ask, and by this time they kind of are getting a hunch. Dylan William, Robert Marzano, same 3 words, and what are they? And the answer is, anybody want to guess? Some of you educators know. Some of you educators, you know. It's the heart of an effective lesson, and it's astonishingly rare, as important as it is. And anyone can do it tomorrow morning if they wanted to. And the answer is checking for understanding. What does it mean? What the heck does that mean? It means when you teach, you monitor, you don't teach the whole dang lesson and then say, okay, now I'm going to give you an assessment. You tell the students what they're going to learn. You teach them in small bites as you walk around and see. You don't even have to hit all the kids. Just hit, sort of, make sure you're high. Take a glance at some of your high-performing kids to see on this one, I'll use chunk, step, Call it what you will. Little manageable bite of instruction, and to see if you got that right. And if there's a pretty good number of kids, and this is incredibly common, pretty good number of kids, they're not going to get it that first time. So what do you have to do? Run around and tutor each one of them. No, you can't do that. That makes no sense, but that's what teachers tend to do. I've seen teachers do whole math lessons and then say, anybody have any questions? And about 15 or 20 hands go up, and what do? They run around while the other kids wait. That's lunacy. No, instead what do? You reteach. So let me get at this just a little bit more deeply with you. And forgive me if I'm getting a little too deep into the weeds here, but I can't resist the temptation to just in sort of brief terms describe to you what every effective teacher does that knocks it out of the ballpark. And this is incontrovertible. First, let's look at the impact. It's been found to be among the largest gains ever recorded when your lesson includes checks for understanding. Multiple checks for understanding followed by reteaching. 3 consecutive years of that kind of teaching. Do you see those numbers? Check out those numbers, will you? What does that mean? It means a kid that's at the 20th percentile, the lower 5th. Get that in your head. Some kid you worry about. 3 years later, that kid is easily into the upper half performance-wise. Easily, maybe more, and after 5 years of this kind of teaching, 7 years of this kind of teaching, folks, it alters academic trajectory, especially for, and I know, I was having this discussion with you, especially for the lowest achieving kids. We talked about what do you do when people say, well, we have a lot of poor kids in this school or district. Do we just have to say, oh, well, so it goes? No, we don't. We really don't. Dylan William found, I just talked to him on the phone the other day. He said it gives easily an additional 6 to 9 months of academic growth per year when you teach in that fashion. 2 to 4 times as much learning occurs. In math, it would be a game changer. I write quite a bit in my book about the incredible difference checks for understanding operate in math. Couple quick stories. I was invited, we moved to Flagstaff, Arizona, my family and I, many years ago, and the principal calls me and goes, oh, I know your work. Could you come and watch this one teacher of mine? His name is Sean Connors. Could you come and watch this guy teach? And I said, well, why? He says, just come. So I'm sitting in the back of the class, and I watch this guy, and he's teaching the kids at that point how to write a good introductory paragraph for an essay. He taught them in small chunks. At the end of each little bit, he would say, go, and he would give them a time limit, because kids dawdle. I don't know if you knew that. So he says, you have this much time. Normally it was 40 seconds, 1 minute, a minute and a half was the most he ever gave them. What's he doing during that minute and a half? He's checking his email. No, that was a joke. He's checking for understanding. He's walking around and he's seeing, they're getting it, she's getting it, she's not quite getting it. Bless your heart, Alyssa, it's a very nice jacket, but you're not getting it. You're sort of getting it, so what does the teacher have to do? Teacher has to go back and say, let me give that one more shot. He did lots of reteaching, clarifying, taking another shot at it. However you do that, you're going to get better results on the second go. And you don't want to spend 10 minutes on that. You want to do quick, interesting cycles. And can I interrupt myself just to say, Senator Hill said something like, he hated high school. You don't have to hate high school. My wife was the highest performing teacher at Tempe High the year they made those dramatic gains, because she not only had a curriculum, she also used checks for understanding more consistently and effectively than anybody else. Kids love, this is a school with 95% free and reduced lunch. Those kids loved her, behaved for her, felt fabulous at the end of every lesson because almost all of them succeeded on her lessons. And this is 95% free and reduced lunch. So anyway, so at the end of the first year that Sean Connors taught at that school, this is the guy at Flagstaff that I'm going back to his story. At the end of 1 year, so I watched this lesson, terrific lesson. We go into the teacher's lounge, sit down, big smile on the principal's face, and he said, we had the largest gains in the state last year on the writing exam. When we looked at the results, we broke it down. The whole English department celebrated until they looked at the data. Almost all the improvement came from one teacher, Sean Connors, the guy who taught the way that we had seen that day. I could go on. This is just about my last slide, folks, so we will have some time for some questions. First of all, you educators in the room, formally speaking, how many of those, I'm looking at you. Look at the names at the bottom of that slide. How many of them do you recognize, those of you who have done K-12 teaching? Several of them, would you say? Okay, this is well-known stuff, okay? This is like a hall of fame of immense, this is the irony of our system. Everyone knows their names, almost everyone. They're highly reputed, but we don't really implement their findings. That's the hell of it, okay? So basically, this is what an effective lesson is, if you don't mind a quick summary. First of all, you have to get all the kids to pay attention. If you're standing up here teaching a whole class and some of the kids are either looking down or even if they're quiet and just rummaging around in their knapsack or whatever, what must the teacher do? Take some kind of action, simple stuff, like move toward them, okay? Or say, this is what my wife and I do, we say, and lots of teachers do. I'm waiting on a couple of you. That's step one. Step two is look right at the kids, smile. I'm waiting on a couple of you. If they're not paying attention within seconds, you move toward them, I'm waiting on you. If you do that consistently, and it goes on throughout the school especially, you're going to get great results. Now in Arizona, if those steps don't work, we can tase kids. But I don't know, I should have talked to Senator Hill about legislation that would allow that, but that's Arizona, tombstone and all that, So I'm not recommending it, I'm just, okay. So no, I'm going to fly through the rest of these. So then what? You make very clear what you're going to learn that day and how it's going to be assessed. We're going to have 5 problems in X math operation. You got to get at least 4 right. That's what my wife told every single kid every day. Followed by what? You teach in small chunks, then turn it over to them to try it while they're doing their guided practice. You give them a time limit. And then you check for understanding. If not enough of them get that chunk, what do? I literally get my teachers to repeat this back to me. I say, check for understanding, and I make them say that several times so that it lodges. And if necessary, we reteach, break things down a little bit more, and then, and only then when they've succeeded on every step do we say, now you do those 5 problems, while I work with those of you who need a little extra help. That's when you do your tutoring, if you will. That's basically the design, if you don't mind me going into a little more detail than a board member or legislator might be terribly interested in. But I think that's good knowledge for anyone interested in education to have. And I'll just end by saying, these good things I've described, folks, they're never going to happen unless we repeat them, clarify them, tell stories about where they work in our school. Not within years, but within days and weeks where, what is your name? Sorry, Joyce has been using checks for understanding. She's getting 3/4 or more of her students to succeed on lessons, which in the past wouldn't have succeeded with even half of them. These are the stories you want to tell. That's part of repetition. Tell stories. Share evidence, share evidence, share evidence, share evidence. That's really what this is going to require of us, folks. What is it? If I've got this right, John Wooden. How many of you know John Wooden, the basketball coach? Legendary. He said, I have an 8-step process for success. I hope I get this right. He said, basically, it's like, it's explanation, application, I'm sorry, I'm missing the third one, and then repetition, 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 and repetition. In other words, you explain, then you let them try it, and then you keep repeating those practices until they fully master it, and not before. Don't stop training students in good teaching until they have mastered these things. Well, that leaves us with some decent time for Q&A. I hope I didn't rush through too much of that, and I'm still running on this quad espresso here. There's still some energy, there's some gas in the tank.
Well, as you have the Q&A, I have a microphone because we are videoing this, and we want to make sure that anybody who's watching will have the advantage of hearing your questions.
You want to talk in there too?
We want to make sure everybody has the advantage of hearing the questions. So if you have a question that you would like to ask, please raise your hand, and Kelsey or I will come over and give you the microphone so that we'll have, all of those who will be watching this will have the benefit of your questions as well.
I forgot we were being filmed. I hope I didn't drive you nuts walking around. Okay.
I got a question over here. We talked about it during the break. We've determined the cell phones, I'd like to get rid of them, but so much of our work is done on a Chromebook or computer. It's not an actual book or paper. How detrimental is that?
Here's my take on this, and I don't want to sound too absolute on it. I have a strong bias against tech in the classroom. I do like, as a writer, I've learned that revising, being able to write and revise is so much easier on a computer. Even that, though, it concerns me that do we not maybe lose something by having students in K-12? Right. You know, you've read some of the research that says that actual handwriting generates and taps into our thoughts and creativity quite possibly better than a screen. So I think there are schools, I'm pretty sure I've read about schools where the only tech they allow, some are saying no more screens, no more computers in the I have no big problem with that. Some are saying we can set things up so that the only thing you can do with that computer is word process. I'm attracted to some of those ideas. The jury's not out on it for me entirely, but I have the same kind of tendency you have to think that, yep. And over here, yeah, wasn't it you?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Scott Hill mentioned classical, but what you're talking about is classical
I love
education.
classical, yeah.
And shouldn't we be just looking at curriculum from that?
I would love that. I wouldn't insist on it. But you know, the schools I'm most attracted to are ones where, I mean, I have 2 9-month-old twin granddaughters right now. I'm waiting for a big, I didn't know. Yeah, well, okay, bunch of sociopaths. Anyway, so sorry. Don't show this to my wife, okay? I am a big fan of that kind of education. I think kids need to read. If we want to transfer knowledge, I have a master's and even some PhD work in English literature, in literature. And I think kids lose out on so much by not being exposed to the best thoughts, the best books, the best works ever written. I have a strong bias toward that. There's a group called Great Heart Schools. There's about 25 or 30 of them in Texas and Arizona.
Yeah.
And I've been to their schools many times. I got my niece to go to one.
Okay.
At the end of those years, not only did she read all these great books, she literally spent at least an hour a day discussing in detail with 12 or 15 other students surrounding on a table the meat of those texts, both historical, scientific, and literary, all of them. Yeah. Real meaningful discussions every day. And then at the end of that senior year, had to write a 15-plus page paper, a thesis, and defend it to a small group at that school. I'm a fan, is all I can say. It's all I can say. I don't know who's next.
Can I just inject this?
Oh, yes.
One of the state board members here in Kansas, who is a tech software, that's been her vocation. Her daughter is in St. John in Maryland.
That's a great place.
They do not allow anything tech in the school. They read 200 books, and the last year of their senior year, they spend 30 days writing a thesis. That's all she's.
And I just to soften that, I don't know that every kid is going to be quite ready for that kind of education, but I think there's ways we could approach it in almost any school. But again, there's more to discuss there. As long as kids are reading good, solid stuff and plenty of it, and discussing it and reading it, I'm good with that. Even if it invites, certain amount of more, definitely, contemporary literature, etc. But I do like those classical schools. I do, and it's where I want my granddaughters to go someday. I was going to say something else. But
C.S. Lewis described it as the moral way to shape people. In other words, conventional is an amoral way of just conditioning. That's his description of it. And that's what's missing in our schools is a moral, we're in a moral crisis.
I think you can teach morality without, in a secular system quite effectively through good books and the courage to teach, appropriately teach morality. I think there's adequate room for that. I really do. I just read 600 pages of C.S. Lewis's letters in the last few months. What a joy. Anyway, Hudson, you're up.
Yeah, there is a model for doing this kind of education at the undergraduate level, which could be easily taken over to high school. That's the old Pearson Integrated Humanities program at the University of Kansas. That was taught by two professors, John Senior and I think Daniel Quinn. And it was about 50 years ago. Look up Pearson Integrated Humanities. They may still have some traces left on the internet, but they taught what is known as the trivium. Okay. And you know what it is. And
the Paideia program also
exactly.
Yes,
that's the kind of thing we need to do. And that is the sort of education we need to do. If we do that, I think we can overcome a lot of this stuff. And so for our schools of education, what do they teach? They can't be taught in 6 weeks.
Suffice to say, let's put it positively. Imagine if our ed schools really looked at the evidence and had an honest, self-reflective moment and said, what do our teachers need most? And what do they need to be trained in? There's an anti-training bias in ed schools. They don't want anything to do with teaching someone how to teach.
Right.
Nothing to do with it. What would happen if they said, this is what teachers need if we want our kids to get the education they need? What a huge lever that could be. But I don't see it happening in the near future. I've got a hand here and here.
I have a quick question. In this room today, I've heard quite a few different ideas and initiatives. What are your strategies for dodging magic bullets so that we can focus? And I want to note, I used this book right when it came out and was working with a 5A high school here in Salina, Kansas. The number of initiatives, the number of changes with wins in education reform, publishing, all these different ideas that are coming at busy school administrators trying to lead effective, focused types of initiatives. How do you sort through that and get to the essence of what you're asking us to do?
Well,
and do it in a manner that can be led with fidelity.
And I'm just going to say, and I'm going to take kind of a page out of Dave and Melanie's book, is first of all, you ask questions built around evidence. And now I'm talking both to, say, school administrators and possibly board members. Ask questions. And as Dave and Melanie's book points out, for instance, you don't just ask a question, do we have a curriculum? You ask that question and you find a way, you have to have these discussions with administrators, right up to the superintendency, if not starting there, to say, true or no, is there not incontrovertible evidence, I'm learning to talk, incontrovertible evidence that you gotta have a curriculum in place. This is one of the things you find in Dave and Melanie's books. You have every right to ask questions like that and say, if the evidence is that strong, do we have one? We don't want to create it, we're board members. But can you just demonstrate for us that there's one in place for every course, that there's plenty of reading and writing and discussion going on, that it's built right in print? Can you just prove to us that that occurs? And are you monitoring it well enough to be able to say to us as board members, let's say, and are you a board member?
No, I'm superintendent.
I thought you would be. I thought you were a superintendent. To be able to say we have those things in place and we do monitor it and we collect evidence to ensure that, in an imperfect world, that it's at least reasonably implemented. But it really comes down to two things: evidence and repetition. You can't just offer the evidence once. And you have to, and again, going to Dave and Melanie, it is Melanie. Melanie's book, ask those questions with a smile. Ask them politely. Persist in asking, but just say, look, we're just trying to establish, and I'm talking to board members, even though you're a superintendent. Although in a way it's the same question, everybody, shouldn't we have these things in place? Shouldn't every teacher know these basic things about instruction? Shouldn't there be lots of reading, writing, and literacy in our schools?
My most important job right now is not superintendent. It's also a parent of a student that is not performing at the level that I want them to. And so when I look at that through the lens, yes, I work for a school district, and that may taint people in their eyes, but as a parent who is seeing regicide occurring across, not just in bigger districts, but in small districts across the United States, it's a concern of mine. What I'm also trying to figure out, because I've heard in this room we need to go to less technology, but we're also being asked to deliver our curriculum with textbooks that have gone away from hard copies, a state assessment that is online, that is on a computer, that's not administered paper pencil. And so I'm just trying to see, how do we reconcile those things so that we truly can do what is, I think, extremely brilliant with what focus is. Many of the people I've talked to have said, yeah, if we need to do it, how do we keep the winds of initiatives from taking us off course for that?
Yeah, and I would just say quickly, and if this isn't a thorough answer, we sure, if your state assessment is on a computer, there better be either I think I was discussing this with one of you guys, there better be a computer class or something to acquaint kids with computers separate from the rest of the curriculum, or maybe not wholly separate. I don't know that I'm ready to say never, ever, ever in every school, no tech. We better be super careful with it. Kids better be able to take the test, number one. And you can have discussions that would lead to that competence. The other part of your question I can't remember, but we just have to go back. Look, does priority matter? I just wrote the third edition to Focus. I replaced the first chapter with priority. We should always ask, wait, stop. What's number one? Dave and I had a chat about this. It really ought to be, it's not the only thing. Outcomes aren't the only thing, but they ought to be the main thing. And that thing is, say, A.J. Craybill likes to say, you better devote a good chunk of your board meetings, every single one, completely protected to where are we doing on the outcomes. There better be some kind of measurement. And, oh God, I don't want to get into the weeds too much here, but for me, there's outcomes and there's also some process data. I'd like every school district to say, let's face it, we don't have a good, clear, effective curriculum for every course. We're going to set benchmarks for their completion sooner rather than later. By this time, they're all done for English and math. Then they're done by this date, with updates at board meetings. So that's the kind of stuff I'd love. And every teacher trained and can demonstrate that they know how to at least do the rudiments of an effective structured lesson. I think that kind of data is worth gathering as well. There was another question from someone. Here comes the mic. Don't sing. I know the minute you get your hand on that thing, it's a temptation. Go ahead.
No, it's not. I was hoping to get your thoughts on FastBridge and
on what?
On FastBridge, or like the universal screeners. And so as a board member, we often ask questions about the outcomes and how are we on track to meet state assessment goals.
What's FastBridge?
FastBridge. It's like a...
FastBridge.
I think of it as like a formative assessment. I might be wrong, but...
Is something they give a few times during the year, maybe?
Yes, to kind of predict, are the kids on track and are they going to meet those goals? But I wonder, when we look at FastBridge results, everything looks very cheery and we're on track, and then state assessment scores don't seem to match up.
Well, it is
an
absolutely
effective tool.
the superintendent, central administration, and the board to say, it's the end of just 1 year. Look at the gap between these FastBridge and our actual state assessments. We need to do something about this. And I don't know enough about FastBridge, but so many of these formative assessments, as they call them. I'm not always a big fan. But interestingly, if you do the right stuff, you do the right things, if kids are reading, acquiring knowledge, writing, I mean, too many of these stories indicate that when you do these things, all your assessments you're going to see gains in all of them. I mean, take something as crude as my friend Jesse Sanchez in Brawley, California, 80-90% free and reduced lunch, horrific math and reading scores, and he looks at some student writing and thinks, we got to do something about this. Again, these simple things some principals do. He says to the faculty, well, you guys, we got to do something. I want you all to at least twice a week, and it'd be better if it was 3, have students write about the content that they're learning in their classes, including PE, where you're learning about anatomy or whatever it might be. And some of them kind of bristled and, Jay, I'm not a writing teacher. Look, you don't have to be a writing teacher. Have them write just a coherent paragraph or 2 about whatever content they learned. Just that crude first-year attempt. I think these numbers accurate. English language arts, 37% succeeding the year before, 67% the next year, and they doubled in math. Math was still low, doubled in math. Writing affects math, believe me. Even doing things like that is going to affect every kind of assessment results, truly.
Is there a state that has matched the nuggets of curriculum and the sequence to teach them and the assessment
The only one I can
that you
think
could
of,
recommend?
in a way, is, I mean, you could throw in Mississippi in a weird way, because in a way, what is Mississippi? Mississippi has, like most states, excuse me, a test that assesses and reflects success or failure in foundational or foundational literacy. And so their methods plainly match their assessment. And because they give sufficient attention to phonics, scores go up. Massachusetts might be a second one. Massachusetts is the highest ranking, in terms of test results, highest ranking in the country, because there's probably they have a real pretty solid year-end assessment, and there's a fairly high proportion of teachers and enough emphasis on education in that state such that they get pretty good results. And yet, I got to pause to say, pretty good results, and yet at one point they weren't high at all. That's part of the reason their MCAS test came in. It was like, got to do something, just like we're all thinking we got to do something. And they all were told, you've got to create curriculum, and the scores are going up, 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 up. And then their state, a little bit like your own may be doing, they just softened on all that stuff. And NCLB disappeared, and now they're struggling. So lots of places, even whole states, have made progress. And why do they stop? Because, this stuff doesn't just perpetuate magically. You got to repeat, emphasize, ask questions. Board members, ask questions with us. Ask logical, reasonable questions. Yeah, but do the best you can. Just say, look, I'm just here. I'm echoing the spirit of that book that Dave and Melanie wrote. You have every right just to say, well, look, disprove me if you want. Show me that this kind of instruction is not effective. And if you can't, well, shouldn't your professional development department be making sure all your teachers know how to teach that way? Disprove for me. I'm wide open. Show me that curriculum's not you don't need to have a coherent curriculum. If you can prove that to me, fine. But if you can't, we better get on this curriculum thing. And at least we're not asking to participate in the creation of curriculum, but at least demonstrate for us. Show us products that allow us to see, yeah, there's a curriculum in place, and the teachers actually follow it. So.
One more question, perhaps. I know that Dr. Schmoker has to jet out of here literally fairly soon.
I know several states, Tennessee for one, has instilled the third grade, if they're not on grade level with their state assessment testing by the end of third grade, then they're not being socially promoted anymore. They're
Right,
keeping them because
right.
that's such a critical time.
Yeah.
And it seems like most of the states that have done that have seen improvements, that parents weren't happy at first, teachers weren't happy at first, but it's worked out. Have you seen that in your studies?
I can't say I'm much of an expert on that one
Okay.
because I used to read the stuff that said, well, that doesn't really work, and then the kids are held behind, it does damage, and I remember reading that stuff thinking, well, gosh, I don't know, that's what they say, but something in my mind was telling me, how can that be? It seems to me you've got to put some pressure on the system to make sure that K-3, don't blame the teachers here, folks. I don't even blame the administrators. The system is completely out of whack on making sure the right stuff gets taught and done and trained, So if you put pressure on the system might ought to respond and think, wow, what are we doing? Are we only, do you realize, folks, that with small groups, an average kid only gets about 25 in a 2-hour reading block. Ever heard of a literacy or a reading block? Almost every school in America, the first 2 hours are literacy. Of that 2 hours, the average kid gets about 25 minutes of instruction. They could be tripling that amount. That's what this Ed Week article we've written. If instead of only teaching a few kids at a time, we taught phonics to the entire class for about 30 minutes. Took us, after the 30 minutes, let the kids do something in a group for 15 minutes. Take the kids who are still struggling, give them 15 more minutes. Now the entire class is getting 30 minutes in phonics. The strugglers are getting 45 minutes. That's a 50% increase. And what do you got left? You got an hour and 15 minutes, 75 minutes left to read out loud to them, to have them talk about what they're reading, to write about what they're reading. All that great stuff. Vocabulary lessons, all that rich stuff. That first 2 hours of the day, I'm digressing, but that's what we need. That's what we need to be doing. I kind of dodged your question a little bit there, but yeah, I would have to say, as Mississippi has shown, there's at least decent evidence that's saying, hey, by third grade, by damn, they got to be reading. That puts pressure on the parents, good pressure, wholesome pressure on parents, the system, everybody.
Yeah, we used to have that.
I have to think it's a reasonable thing to do. So. Okay,
Thank
well, there
you,
we go.
Mike.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Well, Mike talked a lot about what I call the magic in the classroom. For those of us who have been in the classroom, have experienced that magic. So we appreciate what Mike brought to us. There's a lot of information. There's so much more. And so some of you may be interested in saying, wait a minute, I want to take a little bit deeper dive into this. This is so interesting. Something that, was just talked about a few moments ago. How do you implement that? Well, you're in luck because Mike has agreed to work with consortiums of schools that we will provide the resources for. If you're interested in looking into this more, being a part of this innovative schools program that we're going to have that will be starting in the spring, for you to learn more about that, to work with Dr. Schmoker one-on-one in through this program, then let me know. My card is on the table. We would love to talk to you and see if you would like to hear a little bit more about that opportunity. So we are, as Mike leaves us, he has to literally leave us and leave us here in Kansas. We're going to take about a 10-minute break to allow you to stand up, walk around, talk, maybe even catch him before he has to run away. And so we'll meet back here in about 10 minutes with our next part of our program.
For Kane and the rest of the crew.
Yes.